Hey guys, Sparker929 here. So if you've seen my other video, you may know there's a ton of exciting single-player story games coming out in 2025, like Avowed, GTA 6, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Outer Worlds 2, a lot of really good games, right? This got me sort of thinking about some of the greatest single-player games, not only that I have played over the last decade, but overall. And unsurprisingly, Dishonored 1 and 2 seem to be consistently atop that list. And sort of after playing and being impressed by what the original Dishonored had to offer a couple months ago, I decided to pick up and review Dishonored 2. For those unfamiliar with Dishonored 2, it's a stealth action adventure game developed by Arcane Studios and first released in 2016. Dishonored 2 supposedly offers players a unique and politically charged story, filled with themes like nobility and privilege, just reading off from their website. Today's critique will be split into four main parts. Firstly, a complete story overview, on every single mission throughout the game, and I'll have a little bit of my thoughts in between each mission. Then my thoughts on the two main companions, before giving my full and honest opinion on the game's main antagonist, Delilah. Lastly, I will provide my opinion on the game overall, so just encompassing everything. And this is going to be an incredibly long video, so let's get right into it. So Dishonored 2's story follows either Corvo Attano, who many may know as the protagonist of the previous game, or Emily Kaldwin, Empress and heir to the throne, after her mother Jessamine died in Dishonored 1. Dishonored 2's main conflict is introduced to players right at the very beginning of the game via a cutscene that explains the political turmoil that has negatively impacted Empress Emily's reign. Most notably, the Crown Killer, a serial killer who has been murdering and dismembering Emily's political opponents. Most within the Empire believe that Corvo is responsible for these killings, an argument Emily recognizes early into the game.
Don't worry about the rabble-rousers, and we'll catch the Crown Killer, eventually.
People are saying it's you, that these assassinations are a misguided effort to protect me.
No, someone's trying to make us look guilty by targeting your enemies.
Shortly after this conversation, Duke Luca Bell arrives, flanked by machine-like soldiers and supposedly accompanied by the true heir to Dunwall's throne, Jessamine's sister, and Emily's aunt, Delilah Copperspoon, who we'll go over in detail later. Emily and Corvo are attacked by the Duke and Delilah, with Corvo being cast in some sort of stone. It's really important to note here, however, that Emily or Corvo can be turned to stone, as whoever you decide not to play as meets this fate. These events, which all unfold in nearly the first 5 minutes, become the entire main conflict for the rest of the game. Emily, fueled by this vengeance for her father, as well as her rightful desire to rule the throne, escapes Dunwall Tower, leaving the only home she's ever known, to chase down the only lead she can that may bring down Delilah. Emily flees down Dunwall's main street before meeting up with a boat captain named Megan Foster to assist in her true escape. Curiously, Emily seems to trust Megan from the moment they met, which at first seemed weird to me, but as the story continues, I realized Emily never truly trusted Megan, but simply was forced to accept her help out of a complete lack for other options, a common theme which we will see throughout Dishonored's entire story. While resting aboard the Dreadful Whale, which is Megan Foster's boat, Emily is pulled into a dreamlike world called the Void. Here, Emily meets the Outsider, who bestows Emily with supernatural powers. You can refuse the Outsider's powers, in which case you'll go the entire remainder of the game without them, something I seriously don't recommend for first-time players. For reference, the Outsider is a returning character from Dishonored 1, where he served as the supernatural keeper of the Void World, imparting his knowledge and powers on Corvo Attano. We'll go over all the companions, including the Outsider, much later in this video. Outsider powers newly acquired, Emily utilizes Megan's boat, the Dreadful Whale, to make her way to Karnaca, birthplace of her father, Corvo Attano, and setting for the remainder of the game. Here, Emily is set after the first of her mini-targets, Dr. Alexandria Hypatia. Emily learns via Megan Foster that Hypatia could be connected to or know something about the Crown Killer, which so far proves to be Emily's only lead. Megan will continue to act as the player's quest giver and all-knowing spy throughout the rest of the game. Emily arrives in Karnaca before traveling to what the game calls carriage stations, which are really just fast travel points to bigger locations. This, sort of becomes my biggest complaint about Karnaca, as the entire area just serves as a fast travel point, only accessible after the player kills a few enemies or disables really powerful yet really easily deactivated walls of light. Karnaca as a whole throughout the first missions of the game serves little to no purpose outside of bone charms and runes, which is really disappointing considering this is Corvo's birthplace and heart of the Empire. Likewise, I would have liked to see some form of character representation here. For example, Arcane could have implemented a system where players who chose the more lethal approach would see an overall grim and darker Karnaca than those who chose a non-lethal approach. Really just any form of gameplay outside of carriage stations would have been nice, however. After arriving at Admire Institute by way of carriage, which again is really just fast travel, Emily is tasked with infiltrating the building in hopes of learning more about the Crown Killer. Once inside the Institute, Emily can make her way up to Hypatia's office, where she discovers the guards have locked away the good doctor in her laboratory. Curiously, the guards have also imprisoned the janitor Joe Hamilton for interrogation for his accusations toward Hypatia. This is where the branching narrative starts to become more apparent, as players can either choose to go straight to Hypatia's or swoop by the conservatory to learn what Joe Hamilton has to say. If players do choose to talk with Hamilton, his notes eventually point you in the direction of a missing Dr. Vasco, who can be found lying on a cot inside Hypatia's observatory. He has this to say.
Are you all right?
Dr. Hypatia did this. She's the Crown Killer. But she's not herself. She developed a serum trying to help the miners. The first version caused horrible changes to her mind. It's too late for me, but maybe you can still save her. She's a good person.
What can I do?
In my safe, in disease treatment, you'll figure out how to make the counter serum help her. The safe code is 071.
I've always wondered what your flesh tastes like, my dear assistant.
Emily, newly enlightened to Hypatia's true form, has two real options here. Firstly, Emily could kill Hypatia in monster form, thus ending the Crown Killer's reign, but also killing Dr. Hypatia in the process. Or, Emily can choose to seek out Vasco's cure in order to keep Hypatia alive. I believe this is one of the only true examples of gray morality in Dishonored 2, as I could see the moral justification for both killing or sparing Dr. Hypatia, and ultimately it is up to the player to decide which choice fits both with their playstyle and their sort of moral compass. Regardless of the choice, the end result stays the same. The Crown Killer is dealt with, and Emily can conclude her mission at Admire Institute. While I do believe this is one of Dishonored 2's best quests in terms of gameplay and narrative choice, I do have a few complaints to lay out. Firstly, most new players will not discover the cure on their playthroughs, leaving first-time players feeling confused after choosing to kill Hypatia before actually learning she was the Crown Killer. This is what I did in my first playthrough, and to call that choice unfulfilling is a wild understatement. It's such a shame too, because curing Hypatia is one of the most interesting choices players can make throughout the game, and it can be completely missed simply by ignoring a locked-up janitor. Second to this, I feel that the Crown Killer was significantly overhyped. I mean, even throughout the beginning cutscene, Emily mentions the immense negative impact the Crown Killer has had on her legitimacy, painting the Crown Killer to be sort of a true antagonist that Emily would grapple with throughout the game. This isn't the case, however, as the Crown Killer storyline is wrapped up less than an hour into the game, completely killing the anticipation and mystery I had in the very beginning of Dishonored 2. I just feel that the Crown Killer should have lived past the first mission, becoming maybe sort of a mini antagonist, if that makes sense. They could randomly appear throughout the game, giving the character's death or cure more weight and impact on the overall story. As it stands right now, though, the Crown Killer is just another target, quickly dealt with and swept under the rug to further Emily's goals. Secondary to the Crown Killer objective, however, Emily learns that Kieran Jindosh, inventor of the Clockwork Soldiers seen in the opening act, has kidnapped and imprisoned famed inventor and plague curist Anton Sokolov, a character some of you may be familiar with from the previous game. Armed with this new information, as well as some friendly tips from the all-seeing Megan, Emily opts to seek out Kieran Jindosh's mansion in hopes of finding Sokolov alive. Returning to Karnaca here feels much the same as I previously described, as the beginning location once leaving the skiff has little offer outside of a carriage station, and of course a few bone charms and runes, which most people won't go after anyway. This kind of furthers my point that Karnaca's only use is as a go-between for levels and fast travel points, something that, I seriously find disappointing. After disabling an impeding wall of light rather quickly, Emily can ride the carriage all the way to Jindosh's front door. Once inside, players are presented with a very small opening room that doesn't seem to connect with the rest of the mansion. However, after pulling a nearby lever, the entire room transforms into a spiraling entranceway with clockwork soldiers rising from the sublevel in defense of Jindosh Manor. This is a mechanic you'll see throughout the entire mansion, and it's really super unique and makes the location one of the most memorable throughout the rest of the story. With each lever pull also comes the voice of Kira and Jindosh, eerily congratulating the player on how close they are to finding him.
Jindosh.
Welcome, visitor. My home is always open. It's one of my great curiosities, seeing how the common mind navigates these shifting rooms. I'm Karen Jindosh, and a pretty face of that. I challenge you to come find me. Take whatever you seek, but all along the way, and I'll have your body carried to my lab for dissection.
This is the first true point throughout the game where I felt my enemy was smarter or stronger than me in any way. However, continuing throughout the mansion and ducking beneath the platforms as they rise, players can get underneath the machinery that makes the house run in order to escape or hide from the approaching clockwork soldiers. Once to the top portion of the house, however, players are locked into a cutscene with Kieran Jindosh himself, who quite surprisingly immediately recognizes Emily behind the mask. Here, Jindosh almost dares Emily to try and kill him, goading her to, quote, come find him and take what she seeks. Despite Emily obviously planning to kill Jindosh, he treats her arrival here as a game, and I believe this alone makes him one of the game's better villains in my opinion. There are a number of different ways to finally reach Jindosh in his laboratory, but I chose to slip through some maintenance grates located outside of the mansion before working my way up to Jindosh level. Like always, players have two choices in how to deal with Jindosh. Firstly, players can simply kill him, which is pretty easy, assuming you remain undetected, and kill him from above or afar. Or you could take the much more difficult route of trapping Jindosh inside his lobotomy machine, that basically turns him into a vegetable. The latter of the two options can be extremely hard to achieve, as Jindosh is always flanked by two clockwork soldiers, who at this point in the game are very hard to beat. However, if you do manage to trap Jindosh's creation, you can stick around to hear his mad ramblings as he attempts to remember the vast knowledge that has been plucked from his brain.
No! You don't know what you're doing! Anything! I'll give you anything you want! Stop! Don't do this! So much will be lost! An age of advancement!
This is what you were going to do to Anton Sokolov.
And if I combine the acid against a copper plate, what does it do? I knew that a moment ago. Does anyone know the answer?
Shortly after, Jindosh will beg players to end his life, but I prefer to leave him suspended, mindless for all eternity, the same way he threatened to leave us had we failed. After dealing with Jindosh, Emily moves to the basement level of the mansion in search of Anton Sokolov. Visible from above, Sokolov seems to be trapped in some sort of glass maze prison with only one entrance. Here is another example of this location's superior level design, as players must navigate through the maze, stepping on certain plates to trigger areas open in hopes of reaching Sokolov, all the while being chased by a clockwork soldier, assuming you didn't already kill it. Approaching Sokolov, it is clear he has undergone some sort of psychological and physical torture, with very obvious bruising. Shortly after greeting Emily, Sokolov passes out from his wounds and has to be carried away like a meat sack for the remainder of the level. This does severely limit your ability for combat and forces you to either remain undetected all the way back to the front entrance or make an all-out dash and alert every guard like I did. Once Sokolov is safely back to the skiff, Megan has this to say.
You did it. How is he? He's frail and wounded, but he'll recover.
I didn't think it was possible. You must have a story to tell. I'll hear it back at the ship.
Megan's display of concern for Sokolov is the first time up to this point she's shown any real emotion at all, which just goes to show how much Sokolov means to Megan. Overall, rescuing Sokolov is a solid mission, however there's two main complaints I have, first of which is the level's length. While the level design and transforming gimmick of the mansion is fantastic, it's over far too quickly, as I was able to speed through to the base level Jindosh laboratory in less than 3 minutes, not counting, the Jindosh cutscene and a few deaths I had. While not all players will move through the level this quickly, for those that do, it makes what could be one of the most interesting and memorable locations of Dishonored 2 seem like a much shorter side quest. Secondly, I'm not a fan of how many clockwork soldiers were thrown at the player here, especially so early into the game where they can be incredibly hard to kill. I mean, look, if you want to make the level harder, that's fine, but at least provide additional options for players to stealth around the enemies, rather than turning the entire level into a big game of granny. After rescuing Sokolov, Emily returns to the dreadful well for a night's rest. However, the deposed Empress is awoken early, seemingly pulled into the dream-like world called the Void by none other than Delilah herself. Here, Delilah tells Emily how her grandfather cheated on Jessameen's mother with a kitchen maid who eventually gave birth to Delilah. Delilah also details how Jessamine falsely accused Delilah of damaging Dunwall property, an accusation which got Delilah and her mother thrown into debtor's prison, where Delilah's mother eventually died. The details here are extremely damning against the honor and legitimacy of Emily and her mother Jessamine, and for the first time made me actually feel bad for what happened to Delilah. I mean, just listen to how sad these cutscenes are.
During the day, Jessamine and I played games in the tower, but at night I'd go back to the servants' quarters to cockroaches and thin gruel. Emperor Daddy would visit and tell me if I was good. Next year, I'd be old enough to come to court to be a princess. Then one day, pretty Jessamine broke something worth a fortune, and the spy master caught us. She claimed I did it, and he whipped me in the garden house until I bled. My mother lost her kitchen job, and that night we were out on the streets with no place to sleep. I didn't break it.
Would you like to tell me your name?
We were just playing.
Young lady Jessamine. Who is your account?
It was her! Delilah's life. She broke it. Mother and I saw the nastiest parts of Dunwall, ending up in debtor's prison. Jessamine died quick on an assassin's blade, but my mother lingered for weeks after a fat guard broke her jaw. They threw me out when she died. I looked up at the lights of Dunwall Tower and swore revenge. Washing bedsheets in a brothel, I painted on the side, until Anton Sokolov took me as a student. That's the polite word for it. I was crafty even before the outsider marked me, and survived the worst the Empire could offer. Now it's your turn. My mother's sick. She needs help.
Your mother kicked off while you were out begging. She's another bag of bones now, girl.
What? No!
Your sentence is served and she'll be tossed out with the others. You can't stay here anymore.
The details here honestly had me considering whether Emily deserved the throne after all. While I may have felt sympathetic for what happened to Delilah, Emily sure shit didn't, pretty much refusing to acknowledge that what happened to Delilah was wrong, and continuing to reason with Megan and Sokolov that she is morally superior to Delilah and her supporters. Emily's complete lack of acknowledgement for Delilah's situation, as well as Jessamine's false accusations, just served to paint the Kaldwins out as pretentious snobs, adding new depth and background to Emily and Jessamine that truly affect how I view the two. Continuing from here, Emily questions the injured Sokolov to learn any information he may have to offer. Sokolov points Emily in the direction of Brianna Ashworth, a prominent political leader and curator of the Royal Conservatory. During this conversation, Sokolov informs Emily that Ashworth had grown obsessed, mad with power supplied from the women of her oracular order. For those unfamiliar with the oracular order, it is a division of the Abbey of the Everyman that consists entirely of women. Shortly after her conversation with Sokolov, Emily ventures back to the Royal Conservatory via the skiff, which I didn't realize until this point is the exact same skiff used by Dishonored 1's boat captain, Samuel Beechworth. Rather interestingly, Ashworth's mission is the first so far not to utilize the same boring carriage station system, but instead opts to drop players right in the middle of the conservatory's action, a change I wholeheartedly welcome. Players can choose to approach the conservatory in every number of ways. With multiple possible entrances and a much larger exterior level design, the conservatory becomes one of Dishonored 2's highlights for player freedom. After picking up an optional Black Market side quest, I chose to sneak through an open second story window to make my way inside the conservatory proper. The interior of this level is very well designed, as the decor and dark aesthetic combined with the occasional chatter from oracular witches makes this location one of the creepiest in the game. Continuing through the conservatory, players can make their way up to Brianna's top floor office, which is heavily guarded by rabid dogs and oracular witches alike. Here you have two options. Like always, you can straight up assassinate Ashworth and her cronies before doubling back to talk with Delilah's severely pissed statue that has this to say.
As if you could ever hide your face from me, Emily. Little Black Sparrow, free from your cage at last.
Brianna Ashworth is dead.
Spoiled child! You had no right! Born into a silk-padded cradle, you'll never understand what she meant to me.
And everything you've stolen? All the lives you've ruined?
It should have been mine to begin with. Everything that's happened is wrong. But don't you worry, I'm going to make it all better.
Give me back my throne and my father.
Come and take them, girl. I welcome you to my tower.
Option number 2, however, plays out slightly different. If you ignore Ashworth and move up her office to the second floor undetected, you can find a few discarded lenses, which when applied to Ashworth's communion device, render her completely powerless, eliminating any threat Ashworth posed to Emily. While this is an interesting way to complete the objective, I believe you find much more enjoyment from talking to Delilah's pissed statue after fully killing Ashworth. My main concern for this level of the game is again just how hard it is for players to find the non-lethal option to deal with Ashworth, as there's no specific quest markers pointing players to the discarded lenses. Contrastingly, the conservatory and surrounding areas are really well done here, with lots of verticality and a huge number of entrance points for stealthy players. I felt like this was one of the first missions where it wouldn't be a complete chore to go undetected, so hats off to whoever was in charge of level design here. Once back aboard the Dreadful Well, Emily begins to investigate why Delilah can't be killed. Throughout the game, whether it's, mentions from Ashworth or audio logs at Hypatia's, all signs have pointed to some event that happened in Aramis Stilton's home 4 years ago as a source of Delilah's power. Likewise, Emily is tasked with infiltrating and investigating the Stilton home in hopes of finding Delilah's secret. What may seem a simple task at first, however, is halted by the presence of an advanced lock blocking access to Stilton's home. This lock was designed by Kieran Jindosh, who we dealt with earlier, and is considered to be uncrackable. However, Megan informs us there are two people who may likely know the code to Stilton's home: Paolo, leader of the Howlers gang, and the vice overseer Liam Byrne, leader of the Abbey of the Everymen. However, getting help from either of them won't be easy. According to Megan, both parties will shoot on sight and can only be swayed by bringing them the opposing faction leader's body. Quite an interesting demand. While the decision seems simple, according to Emily, Megan ensures that the Empress understands that whoever lives will not only rule the Dust District and Karnaca's mines, but will more than likely help Emily and stabilize the Empire once she retakes the throne. While it is up to the player to decide, it is my belief that Liam Byrne offers the Dust District the greatest chance for stability due to his better organized and supplied militia. For this reason, I eliminated Paolo, who has to be killed twice due to his mummified hand, so I guess that's a thing. Once dead, Emily can carry his body straight to the Abbey's headquarters, where Liam Byrne will congratulate her on a job well done, before allowing her a single request. Of course, Emily requests the code to Stilton's home, which Liam Byrne finds very strange, but ultimately obliges and costs up the secret code for Emily's use. Emily can conclude her business in the Dust District, leaving behind Byrne and the Abbey of the Everymen to manage possibly the single most important location in Karnaca. The Dust District overall, in my opinion, is a very interesting location, as it is the first in the story to provide actual depth and story to Karnaca, something the previous 3 missions notably failed to do. While the Dust District is not excellent in terms of level design, I believe the story and decisions presented here are enough to make this location memorable. My only wish for the Dust District is that whoever you decide to side with, whether Paolo or the Abbey, should have some presence in the rest of the game, rather than just becoming something noted in the final cutscene. Regardless of who you decide to side with, the end result stays the same. The code is acquired, and Emily can finally enter Aramis Stilton's hideaway home. Once through the gates to the Stilton mansion, it's fairly evident something major has gone wrong here, as Emily is completely incapable of using her outsider powers, a restriction we have not seen anywhere else in the game. Progressing into the mansion, it is clear it has been abandoned for some time. With scattered cobwebs and several portions of the collapsed roofing, the mansion has clearly seen better days. Despite this, Stilton still remains here, playing what sounds like a piano in a caged-off portion of the house. Curiously, Emily notes that Howlers, likely paid by the Duke, have been feeding Stilton periodically. Moving upstairs, Emily can drop down a caved-in portion of the flooring, finding herself face-to-face with Aramis Stilton. Any attempt to converse with Stilton here is interrupted by the outsider, who has this to say.
3 years ago, something inside Aramis Stilton snapped like a cheap lock. A part of him and a part of this house never left that evening. The Duke's inner circle are still gathered here, setting their grand plan into motion. Delilah's plan. And a part of Aramis Stilton is always here, still breaking. The Void is not exactly a place, and it's much older and stranger than you could ever know. It watches you from within. And at the heart of Stilton's house, the Void is leaking through a pinprick left behind by Delilah's little trick. Even magic is perverted here, and things don't work like they should. Take this. Imagine it's a kind of timepiece. Go and watch the Duke and Delilah. See for yourself what they did.
The Outsider gives Emily a unique item that basically allows the player to travel through 2 time periods, Emily's current time period, as well as the period Stilton seems to be trapped in. Using this ability lets you access parts of the house that may not be accessible in its current dilapidated state. An interesting gimmick, sadly exclusive solely to this mission. After acquiring her new ability, Emily is retasked with finding the code to Stilton's private quarters, and to do so, players must transition between the 2 timelines in order to avoid obstacles and enemies in each given period. For example, transitioning to Emily's time period allows players to slip through an open kitchen grate, which is not possible in Stilton's time period. After acquiring the code via a journal in Stilton's back patio, players can slip into his private quarters to witness the events that made Delilah unkillable.
Focus on the void behind the bow. You can feel her power, can't you?
By the stars! This is more exciting than any orgy I've ever attended. Wait! Wait! We can't really... Idiot!
Here, returned from the cold, from forever.
How curious. It seems to have worked.
My spirit is safe now, inside this thing. Luca, you must lock it away.
I can still see the insides. One has become a stone, the other reforged and marked by the one whose eyes are black. Poor Aramis. I feel obliged to take care of him out of loyalty to my father.
Wait. You are hidden, but I know who you are. I know when you are. You've come to watch me return, and someday I'll come for you.
The void beyond the world is strange. I won't ever understand all I've seen.
It's not clear exactly how this ritual was discovered by Stilton, but its results are undeniable. Once done viewing the ritual, Emily can conclude her mission at Stilton's Manor, slowly making her way back through the dilapidated mansion towards the front entrance. Stilton's Manor overall is a very interesting location, one which benefits from the story advancement and time-traveling gimmick. I really have no complaints with Stilton's mission, and while it may be much smaller in scale than the previous levels, it does much more in terms of gameplay and story advancement than all the previous ones combined. I do recognize, however, that Stilton's character plays very little role in the mission itself, and players' decision to kill or leave him alive has literally no impact outside of the game's final cutscene. Shortly after leaving Stilton's Manor, but just before exiting to the Dust District, Emily is transported to the Void World to talk with the Outsider about the origin of Delilah's power. Frankly, the story here starts becoming confusing, as the Outsider tells Emily that Delilah and him are connected in this big reveal, but this connection is surface level, with the only true similarity being their possession of the Outsider mark. Emily also learns via the Outsider that in order to truly have a chance at killing Delilah, she must first find Delilah's lost spirit, which is currently being held by her next target, Duke Luca Bell. Emily, like every other mission, sets off via skiff, porting just down the road from the Duke's mansion, in hopes of finishing her last target before Delilah. However, before even coming close to the Duke's Manor, players must work their way up the main road, avoiding or killing the unusually dense amount of enemies located here. You can avoid any potential confrontation by working your way rooftop to rooftop, similarly as I do here. Additionally, players can find an optional aid in the black market shop, purchasable with coins, that turns off the charge rails, allowing you to waltz straight down the carriage line to the Duke's Manor. While I usually don't interact with these black market shops throughout the game, I was pleasantly surprised to see items that can alter gameplay or level mechanics rather than the usual ammo and tonic refills. Working my way down the newly disabled rail line allowed me to jump straight past a large chunk of the mansion's front in search of any top floor entrance. After failing to find an upper level entrance and dying multiple times, I ended up moving down to the lowest floor of the mansion where I slipped through a small grate into a bedroom of sorts. Shortly after, I made my way through the mansion, carefully avoiding the numerous guards and clockwork soldiers dotted around the place. It's surprisingly easy to move within the interior of the mansion without being caught, mostly by utilizing chandeliers and back stairways that seem to be less guarded than the main grand staircase. Once on the top floor of the mansion, Emily is greeted by what seems to be Duke Luca Bell. However, on further inspection, Emily realizes the man is simply a doppelganger of the Duke, placed here to confuse would-be assassins. If you choose to talk with the fake Duke before assassinating him, Emily proposes an interesting plan.
No offer to bow or kiss my hand.
I could say the same.
A mystery. Let's have it then. Who are you and what do you want?
Listen, I think you're the Duke's body double. You can't have any love for the man. I'm here to end his rule, and I have an idea you should hear.
All right, you've figured it out. But if you're not here to assassinate the Duke, what do you want?
It occurs to me that you might make a more agreeable Duke than Luca Abel. If I wanted to depose him without having to slit his throat, do you think you could convince people that you're the Duke?
That's bold. I have to admit it's crossed my mind. If people believed that I was actually Duke Abel, and that he was the political decoy, we could have him committed for lunacy. We could convince everyone that the Double's finally lost his mind and believes he's the Duke. I've spent years perfecting my performance. But there's a catch. He's got a medallion that I need. Even if I sound convincing, which should be the easy part, his Grand Guard officers will ask to see the medallion as proof. Luca never puts it aside.
All right. It shouldn't take me long. Once it's done, I'll be leaving the city. Soon after, I'll send instructions from Dunwall, and I'll expect a great deal of flexibility and cooperation on your part. There's still time to pull Serkonos back from the edge of the cliff. We can undo the damage Duke Abel has inflicted.
I'd like that. But I'll guide Serkonos in the ways I see fit for the people here, not as the hand-chosen puppet of your empire. If you agree with that, just render the Duke unconscious and bring him to his chambers. I'll handle the rest.
After this conversation, you have two choices. Firstly, you can of course kill the Duke and his body double, thus ending the Duke's reign. However, this choice also leaves Serkonos without a leader for the foreseeable future. Secondly, you can follow through with the proposed plan, finding and incapacitating the real Duke in order to have him replaced with his double. I prefer the second option of replacing the Duke with his double, as the new Duke seems to actually care for Serkonos, which he makes abundantly known when telling Emily that he will not act as her puppet if placed in power. The new Duke is the first character at any point in the game, including Emily, who seems to take into account what's best for the people he rules, which makes him one of the most respectable characters in my eyes. The choice to depose or kill the Duke in this mission is also the first point in the game where I felt the lethal and non-lethal options had any real difference, as usually the two options are only different on the surface level, like in the case of Kieran Jindosh or Aramis Stilton. However, the decision with Duke is different, as the non-lethal choice you make here can not only give Emily a powerful ally, but also ensure that Serkonos has a capable leader that for once has their best interest in mind, displaying a long-lasting impact not seen in any of the other non-lethal solutions. After dealing with the Duke, players can exit the mansion proper and use the newly discovered safe code left by Duke Abel to access the massive vault to the back of the level area. Once inside the safe room, you can sneak around or kill the clockwork soldiers before walking up to the mysterious item kept in the center of the safe room. The mysterious item turns out to be Delilah's spirit, which Emily must capture in the heart gifted to her in the beginning of the game. Doing so, however, will kill her mother Jesmine's ghost, who's been appearing to help Emily throughout the game. After having one last chat with Jesmine, Emily ultimately decides to trap Delilah's spirit, thus releasing her mother's, a move which Emily seems to struggle with despite having literally no choice if she intends to take down Delilah. Once Delilah's soul is secured, Emily can make her way down to the waterfront to meet up with Megan and conclude her mission. The Duke's mission was one of my favorites in terms of gameplay and level design, with the mansion and its plethora of possible approaches feeling incredibly well thought out. For me, the only complaint about the mission is to do with Delilah and her spirit. The whole idea that by capturing Delilah's spirit and returning it, you'll be able to finally kill her is pretty confusing unless you understand the spiritual and physical connection and the reference here. I never really understood this connection until I began researching it, which isn't something players should have to do to provide clarity to the game's story. Outside of this, the Duke's Mansion is my favorite location and quest within the game, and it's clear extra time was taken to really make this portion of the game excel. Once the Duke is dealt with, all the pieces are in place for Emily to attempt her capture of the Dunwall throne. After talking with Megan and sorting out your gear, you can take one final trip aboard the skiff, this time to return to Dunwall for the first time since the game started. Once pulled into the harbor, it is clear Dunwall has seen better days, with a visible dark cloud covering the area and crashed boats scattered around the port. Once off the skiff, you can begin making your way up to Dunwall's main road, the same road you ran down to escape much earlier in the game. Surprisingly, Dunwall's streets are relatively unguarded, with no enemies on the lower half of the castle. What Dunwall's lower half lacks in combat, it makes up for in atmosphere with some of the creepiest sounding music I've ever heard. Adding to the ambiance here is the occasional quiet singing of Delilah's witches, who are scattered around the castle. Once through the tower entrance, Emily can stop by to talk with the Abbey of the Overseer, visibly hurt but not yet dead. He has this to say.
I saw the High Overseer fall. All is lost. Leave this place.
The Abbey assaulted the tower?
Somehow we were overcome. Not just Delilah's sorcerers and their gravehounds, but mechanical men. Automated soldiers. The ancient music was useless against them.
Rest now. But know that I'm going to end Delilah's reign. I swear it.
At death's door, I smell the corruption of the void upon you. A heretic against a heretic. Laughable. The world is doomed.
It seems the Abbey of the Everymen, who you helped earlier in the Dust District, is to blame for the lack of enemies at Dunwall Tower, as their raid, while unsuccessful, has put a severe dent in Delilah's available troops. Curiously, the Overseer also comments negatively about Emily's use of the Outsider mark, something that Vice Overseer Liam Byrne seemingly had no problem with earlier in the game. Shortly after this conversation, you continue through Dunwall's main gate, where you're immediately attacked by some sort of plant-like enemy, likely the work of Delilah, and as far as I know, not seen elsewhere in the game. Past this gate is the first truly guarded part of Dunwall since you left the skiff, and is where all of Delilah's remaining troops seem to be concentrated. While there is a huge number of enemies here, I found no reason to avoid combat with Delilah's troops, as Emily is severely overpowered by this point in the story. I instead opted to confront every one of Delilah's witches head-on, likely killing a few dozen before reaching Dunwall's main tower. I think this pre-area as a whole could benefit from a higher degree of difficulty that forces players into a stealthier approach, as this is supposed to be a heavily guarded location after all. Dunwall's main tower interior is a location players of the previous game will immediately recognize, as the location is almost identical to the previous game, minus a few minor tweaks here and there. Most of the location, however, is pretty pointless, as your only real objective here is to turn on the elevator's power via basement whale oil station, which can be completed in less than 5 minutes. However, there is a hidden objective located here, which I will go over shortly. Returning to the elevator allows Emily to make her way up to Dunwall's main throne, returning to the very location where the game started. Inside the throne room, sitting atop what used to be Empress Emily's royal chair, is Jessamyn's traitorous sister, Delilah. On my first playthrough, I attempted to assassinate Delilah here, a move I would really advise against, as Delilah is completely immortal no matter how many times you successfully assassinate her. Taking this approach can also completely break your game if you're not careful, forcing you to reload from any save before you went up Dunwall's elevator. And depending on how many times your game autosaves, this can set you back significantly. In my case, all the way back to the skiff. In contrast, the actual and not broken way to confront Delilah is to utilize the heart item in your inventory to reattach her human and soul forms. Doing so locks you into a cutscene where Delilah utilizes a nearby painting to escape Dunwall's throne room. Here players, of course, have two options. Firstly, you can follow Delilah into the painting and kill her various clones before assassinating Delilah herself. This is the approach I took in my first playthrough, and it honestly makes the most sense, as Emily harbors a deep hatred for Delilah and consistently remarks that the fraudulent ruler will get what's coming to her. Your second choice is to sever the connection between Delilah and the Void, effectively rendering her powerless. This can only be accomplished if you thoroughly explore Dunwall's base floor chapel and read a note detailing instructions on how to bend the Void connection. Nearby this note is also a detailed audio recording of Delilah that, when complete, will prompt you to craft a corrupted rune skull to combine with 3 ingredients found within the chapel. Doing so produces the corrupted rune skull that can be placed on Delilah's throne after she flees in the painting. Once this rune is planted, you must confront Delilah but choose to render her unconscious during combat rather than killing her. Once unconscious, Delilah can be carried back through the painting's portal and placed upon the throne with a corrupted rune skull, triggering this cutscene.
what I've always deserved. My justice. Now what's always been marred and distorted will be perfect. I've waited so long. Sing my songs and lick my flesh. Worship me.
It is important to note that Corvo is freed from his stone prison, regardless of how you deal with Delilah. With Delilah defeated and Emily and Corvo reunited, Emily can conclude her story and roll the ending cutscene. This cutscene effectively serves to recap the decisions you made throughout the story, and is different depending on whether or not you had a high chaos level, which means lots of killing, or low chaos level, very little killing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this cutscene has 19 possible iterations or endings depending on what decisions you made throughout the story. A huge number we couldn't possibly go over here. This cutscene, while well crafted and varied, does little in my opinion to give weight to your actions throughout the story, as its still shot frames evoke almost no sense of accomplishment to what you have achieved. Had Arcane opted to show the real impacts and consequences of your decisions throughout the game, such as adding more sick howlers because you killed Hypatia, or less clockwork soldiers because you killed Jindosh, it would have likely given a greater emotional impact to the game's final scene. Secondary to this, the entire level feels much too easy. Whether this is due to the amount of abilities you have by this point in the game, or lack of enemies at Dunwall Towers, I really don't know. In my opinion, any game should just not have its final level be one of the easiest, as it fails to give weight to the closing minutes of the game, much the same way the ending fails to give weight to your actions throughout the story. Had the finale been properly level scaled to ensure players are challenged, it's my belief I would have walked away much more satisfied from the game's final moments. The companions in Dishonored 2, Megan Foster, Anton Sokolov, and The Outsider each contribute to the game's world and story in meaningful ways, but their impact is kind of uneven. While they bring context and thematic depth, their integration into the narrative often lacks weight and development needed to make them feel essential. Let's break down the roles and how they interact with the protagonists, particularly Emily, in greater detail. Firstly, Megan Foster is the prominent companion in Dishonored 2, serving as your guide and ally throughout the game. As the captain of the Dreadful Whale, she ferries the protagonist to the mission and provides background information about the unfolding events in Dunwall and Karnaca. Initially presented as a mysterious figure with a shady past, her true identity as Billy Lurk, Dodd's former second-in-command, is gradually revealed throughout the story. This unmasking occurs through subtle clues and dialogue, with the final confirmation coming late in the game when she openly admits her role in the assassination of Empress Jessamine Kaldwin, Emily's mother. Her admission is a moment filled with dramatic potential as it directly ties her to the events that set the first game's story in motion. However, while this revelation adds complexity to her character, the emotional impact of the moment is somewhat diminished by the lack of meaningful follow-up. Megan's confession does not significantly alter her relationship with Emily or Corvo, and the game misses an opportunity to explore the tension or potential forgiveness that could arise from such a significant admission. Instead, her role continues largely unchanged, and her narrative arc feels incomplete. This is emblematic of a broader issue in Dishonored 2. While Megan's character has depth and backstory, the game doesn't fully capitalize on the opportunities to explore her inner conflict or her relationships with Kaldwin's in a more impactful way. Megan's interactions with Emily are further marked by recurring moral tension. If the player opts for a high chaos, violent approach, Megan often expresses unease or disapproval, subtly hinting at the consequence of such choices. While this dynamic could have been used to create a meaningful conflict or push Emily to reconsider her actions, it remains superficial with no tangible consequences for ignoring Megan's perspective. Her role as a moral voice could have added depth to the narrative, but instead, it feels like a missed opportunity to create a more dynamic and emotional relationship. The second companion we're going to go over here is Anton Sokolov. Anton Sokolov, as you may know, is the brilliant inventor and artist from the first game, Dishonored 1, and he returns in Dishonored 2, though his role is significantly smaller. Early in the game, Sokolov is captured by Kieran Jindosh, Delilah's ally, and inventor of the Clockwork Soldiers. Rescuing him from Jindosh's Clockwork Mansion is one of the game's pivotal early missions, and while his captivity creates a sense of urgency, his role after being freed is far less impactful. Once aboard the Dreadful Whale, Sokolov serves primarily as a source of exposition, offering commentary on the state of the world and reflecting on his own past actions. He acknowledges the harm caused by his inventions and expresses a desire to atone for this, but this is not really explored in much depth after that. While Sokolov's insights into Delilah's rise to power and the political state of the Empire are valuable, his presence feels more like a callback for fans to the first game than a fully realized character arc. Sokolov's relationship with Emily or Corvo, depending on who you played as, is cordial but distant, which is kind of a weird feeling considered, he played a large impact in the first game. He occasionally offers advice or comments on their actions, but his influence on the protagonist's journey is minimal. As with Megan, his potential to serve as a moral intellectual foil to Emily is largely untapped, leaving his role feeling somewhat kind of unfulfilled. Our third and last companion to go over is the Outsider. The Outsider is perhaps one of the most interesting and iconic figures in the Dishonored series, and his presence in Dishonored 2 continues to provoke intrigue and debate. As the source of Emily and Corvo's supernatural powers, he remains a constant observer of the protagonist's journey, offering cryptic commentary at key moments. His musings often touch on themes of power, choice, and consequences, challenging the player to consider the morality of their own actions. Despite his compelling presence, the Outsider role in Dishonored 2 can feel repetitive for those familiar with the first game. While his philosophical musings add depth to the narrative, they barely break new ground or significantly influence the story's direction. His detachment from the events of the game make him feel more like a narrative device rather than an active participant. This is particularly noticeable in Dishonored 2, where his interactions with Emily lack the same emotional weight as his relationship with Dodd in the Knife of Dunwall DLC, where he played a more central role. That said, the Outsider commentary does serve a mirror for the player's choice, subtly shaping how the protagonist's journey is perceived. His observations can be interpreted as either approval or condemnation, depending on the player's actions, adding a layer of moral ambiguity to the story. However, this lack of direct involvement in the plot means that his potential as a character remains completely underutilized. So we've gone over all three main companions real quickly, but I kind of want to look at the dynamic these companions have with Emily or Corvo. One of the more intriguing aspects of Dishonored 2 is how the companions often hold differing opinions from Emily or Corvo. This creates, sort of a subtle tension in the relationships with these companions. Megan and Sokolov frequently express unease or outright disapproval if the player takes a high chaos approach, which is loss of killing, while the Outsider's cryptic remarks often challenge the morality of the protagonist's choices, regardless if you chose lethal or non-lethal. These moments of disagreement add nuance to the story, emphasizing the weight of the protagonist's decisions. However, these dynamics are rarely developed into meaningful conflict or character growth. For example, Megan's disapproval of violent tactics is voiced, but it's never really acted upon. And Sokolov's reflections on the danger of unchecked power never lead to deeper conversations or consequences for Emily. Pretty similarly, the Outsider's commentary, while thought-provoking, often feels disconnected from the immediate events of the story, as he's not really in the realm that Emily is. This lack of follow-through diminishes the potential impact of these interactions, making the companions feel more like passive observers, I guess, than active participants in the protagonist's journey. My overall assessment of these companions would be that in Dishonored 2, Megan and Sokolov, as well as the Outsider, bring valuable context and thematic depth to the game, but their roles often feel underdeveloped. Megan's unmasking as Billy Lurk adds an interesting layer to her character, but the lack of meaningful follow-up limits its impacts. Sokolov provides historical and scientific insights, but ultimately feels like a shadow of his former self, especially if you played the previous game. While the Outsider's cryptic commentary, though engaging, treads familiar ground without breaking any new narrative territory. While these companions do add flavor and context to the game, they rarely rise above their roles as supporting characters, leaving the protagonist's journey feeling somewhat isolated and the relationships underexplored. This lack of deeper interaction is a missed opportunity in the game that otherwise excels in creating a rich and detailed immersive world. In conclusion, Dishonored 2 stands out as a game that excels in several key areas, making it a worthy successor to its predecessor in many respects. The game's combat mechanics are finely tuned, offering a wealth of options for players to approach situations with creativity and finesse. Whether you choose a lethal or non-lethal playstyle, the game's arsenal of powers, gadgets, and stealth tools allow for a deeply personal and engaging experience. Players can craft their approach in any way that aligns with their preferences, whether that's sneaking through the shadows without leaving a trace, or using devastating supernatural powers to eliminate enemies in dramatic fashion. The fluidity of these mechanics ensures that every encounter feels satisfying and intentional, no matter your approach. The levels design, in particular, is a standout feature of Dishonored 2. Each mission feels distinct and memorable thanks to its unique concept or gameplay gimmick. The game doesn't simply rely on its atmospheric art direction or intricate architecture. Instead, it uses these elements to create levels that feel alive and dynamic, encouraging exploration and experimentation. Standout examples include the Clockwork Mansion, with its shifting walls and mechanical wonders that challenge the player's spatial awareness and creativity, and A Crack in the Slab, a mission which introduces a haunting time travel mechanic that seamlessly blends the narrative and gameplay. These levels are not just showcases of technical achievement, but also serve as a masterclass in environmental storytelling. Each environment feels like a living, breathing world that invites players to uncover its secrets, piece together stories, and approach objectives in countless ways. This attention to detail and variety elevates the gameplay experience, making every mission a fresh and exciting challenge. However, these strengths are undermined by the game's weaker aspects, most notably in its writing. While the world of Dishonored 2 is undeniably rich with lore and atmosphere, the main narrative fails to live up to the standards set by its predecessor. The story often feels predictable and lacks the emotional depth needed to truly immerse players in the stakes of its conflict. This is especially disappointing given the strength of the game's premise, which positions Emily Kaldwin and Corvo Attano against Delilah Copperspoon, a usurper who threatens the throne. While the setup is ripe with potential for political intrigue, personal stakes, and moral ambiguity, the execution falls pretty flat here. The narrative struggles to maintain momentum, often feeling more like a series of loosely connected events than a cohesive journey. This is particularly evident in the characterization of Delilah, the game's main antagonist. As a villain, Delilah is meant to be a figure of menace and intrigue, but she falls flat due to her shallow motivations and unconvincing presence. Her quest for power is rooted in jealousy and entitlement, which could have been compelling if explored with greater nuance. However, the game fails to delve deeply into her psyche or provide meaningful interactions that would make her feel like a worthy adversary. Instead, Delilah comes across as a one-dimensional character, serving more as a plot device than a true driving force for the narrative. Compared to the compelling antagonists of the first game, such as Dodd, whose moral ambiguous journey added depth and complexity to the story, Delilah's shortcomings are glaring. Her lack of nuance leaves the story feeling hollow at its core, undermining the emotional stakes of the protagonist's quest. The supporting cast, while somewhat more developed, also struggles to leave a lasting impression. Megan Foster, later revealed to be Billy Lurk, serves as the protagonist's main companion throughout the game. Her transformation from a mysterious guilt-ridden figure to a repentant assassin is one of the more intriguing character arcs, but it remains underexplored. Her confession about her role in the assassination of Emily's mother, Jasmine Kaldwin, is a moment filled with dramatic potential, but it lacks the emotional weight it deserves. The game misses an opportunity to explore the tension this revelation could create, as neither Emily or Corvo significantly react to this information. Megan's moral commentary on the player's actions, while a welcome touch, also feels superficial, as it rarely leads to meaningful interactions or consequences. Anton Sokolov, another returning character from the first game, provides historical and scientific insights, but remains a largely passive figure. While his reflections on the dangers of unchecked ambition and his own culpability in shaping the world's power struggle do add some thematic depth, his whole role in the story is pretty limited. He feels more like a background character than an active participant, which is disappointing, given his vibrant personality and pivotal role in the first game. The Outsider, meanwhile, continues to be one of the most interesting and fascinating elements of the Dishonored universe. His cryptic commentary and philosophical musings on power and consequence provide a moral framework for the player's actions. However, his role in Dishonored 2 feels less impactful than the first game. While he remains a compelling presence, his lack of direct involvement in the narrative makes him feel more like an observer than an active force shaping the events of the story. His commentary, while thought-provoking, often treads familiar ground, failing to push the narrative or its themes in new and exciting directions. Really, he just does pretty similar things as he did in Dishonored 1. This lack of strong central narrative and compelling character arcs weakens the game's overall impact. While the gameplay and level design are exceptional, the story struggles to keep pace, creating a disconnect between the player's experience of the world and their investment in its stakes. It's frustrating because Dishonored 2 shows so much promise in its mechanics and world building, yet the writing and character development fail to match the same level of care and creativity. The result is a game that is undeniably fun and impressive in many ways, but ultimately lacks the narrative cohesion and emotional resonance that could have elevated its true greatness. In the end, Dishonored 2 is a game of contrast. Its combat level design are a joy to experience, showcasing the ingenuity and artistry of the developers. The sheer brilliance of its gameplay systems make it really, really easy to lose hours experimenting with its powers and exploring the intricacies of its world. Yet despite these high points, the game's narrative flaws, underwhelming companions, and disappointing central villain hold it back from being a true masterpiece. For those who prioritize gameplay and level design, Dishonored 2 remains a must-play, but for those seeking a gripping story to match its mechanics, it may leave something to be desired. Ultimately, it's a game that shines brightest when you're in the moment-to-moment, immersed in its thrilling gameplay, but leaves you wanting more once the credits roll. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. This video took a very, very long time to make. Played the entire game, went over everything, so you can imagine it took a lot of time to kind of complete this. But hopefully you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time. Have something that works. Stay tuned for it. Like and subscribe. Peace.